So I'm going to talk about Vanguard and Last Seen Alive, and both of these were bad. I'll explain why neither one is worth watching, and then I'll put you over to James to talk about Genius. And I'm not introducing his meal because it's the same meal that I gave him earlier.
As earlier, it was awesome the first one. So this isn't what was left over from the previous meal. It's just
different.
A remake of it.
Of the same sort of dish.
And it was delish. Yeah.
So I don't know which one I would put ahead. Honestly, they're just so bad, both of them. And the messages with the movies are bad. I want them both to be on the bottom. But one of them has to be on the
Dead,
top.
eat for last.
But, so I had this one on top just because I'm like, okay, well, I did see some nice scenes of Africa and stuff like
Victoria
that.
Falls. I was born about 4 miles, 3 miles away from that. So what would that be? About 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers
And I
away?
doubt that the stunt was real. Like, they had Jackie Chan. But I think that was, taking a ski. Do you call them ski-doos? What do you call them?
I don't know what they're called. Jet.
I don't know. Anyway,
the things that are in water, skidoos if they're on snow. But I've forgotten. I know a guy who used to work with in the city was killed by one.
Yeah.
He ended up probably into one of them, but was killed out on a lake. I presume he was swimming and dude just went right over him. So I've been on one of those once. It's up on Slave Lake. It was a pretty good experience, but I could have done without.
And he had a house on the beach there, and he had one of those things. And he was trying to convince me to go on, and I'm like, no.
Well, you didn't go.
No, I didn't.
I made sure I can't swim, so I made sure I had a
life jacket.
Life jacket on. Yeah. It went okay.
Anyway, so I'm not into that sort of thing. But so I watched the scene where he went near the edge of they were up on top of Victoria Falls, and it was pretty exciting and everything.
Yeah, it's over 100 meters down. That's not 100 feet. It's about 360 feet or something like that.
Scenes too, but honestly, there's a whole lot of action and there's some nice scenes and everything, but there's not enough story to hold it. And honestly, they're trying to. There's a lot of subtitles you'll have to read in this if you want to watch the movie, which whatever, but it's not worth the time of sitting down and reading the subtitles. But there's enough action, so you don't really want to look away anyway, to do something else. But at the same time, there's not enough story for you to really care about the action. So you're like, after a while, you're like, okay, why am I watching this? And there's. Seems like, I don't know. I love Jackie Chan, like I've said before.
Oh, he's funny, yeah.
But this is a terrible movie. Maybe this is his worst one he's ever done, and it's not because of him. But honestly, I don't know what made him do this movie. Was it politics, or does somebody have some information on him and is blackmailing him into doing bad movies like this one? Honestly, it's terrible. And
did it have a political message? Yeah.
Well, there's some things, there's a little toddler who at one point he says something like, Captain China's more awesome than Captain America, or whatever.
Yeah.
And
is there such a thing? There used to be a Captain Canuck.
They made it up for the movie.
Okay.
But it's just silly. It's just to kind of put down America and put up China.
A lot of people are doing that nowadays, and they're confused.
There's the bad guys who are hunting in Africa. They're not Chinese, and so they're trying to be against certain groups, and
so they are kind of like Europeans, neo-colonial Europeans.
And they don't seem to like maybe Arabic people very much or something. But anyway, the makers of this movie.
So they were kind of down on where there are terrorists involved or something like that?
Well, mostly it was about well, honestly, it's just about making action and try to sell a movie, but without really doing the work of making a reason for people to watch the movie. But yeah, they hang out. There's, like it says, in in locations set in locations across the globe, including London, Zambia, India, and
I was born in Zambia.
an Arabian desert and Dubai. And it's like, okay, why didn't you just make a movie set in maybe 2 of those places or whatever? But instead, you're trying to just knock off a whole bunch of areas, or make the bad guys, in one movie, make the bad guys, you hate Americans, okay, fine. Make it about, and then in another movie, make it about Arabic people that you hate. I don't know, but there's just too much you were trying to do in this movie, and none of it worked. It was.
Let's just flip a coin. Like, what's
Yeah.
a 200-sided coin? Like, what country, at least? There's about 200 countries in the world. Is the villain going to come from? Instead of it used to be like South Africans for a while, white South Africans, of course, and like if you're going to have an international sort of thing, Russia and international People's Republic of China. There's lots of nice Chinese people over here who are actually against
but
communism,
some
against
of it
the
is
People's
so
Republic
ridiculous.
of China.
Like with the Africa stuff, it's like, Chinese people are so good for animals in Africa. Like they have one pretty Chinese young woman who's playing with a lion, and he's like a big
Don't try
cat
this
with
at
her.
home or on the road.
Exactly, and it's like, oh my gosh. And I hope it was just like computer generated images, so that she wasn't actually. I don't know how much Chinese female actresses are thought of as disposable or what, but that's just a bad thing to do, playing with it. And so the hunters were not Chinese. There was no mention, of course, of things like a rhinoceros horn or whatever. Like there's
wet markets where you've got exotic
ridiculous.
creatures all the way from Africa to
China's
Manitoba
lucky
being
thing
brought
that they
into
were there
China.
to save the day. But at one point, they one woman, I think it was a woman, sprays a hyena in the face with would be pepper spray or something like that, right?
Don't try
And I'm
this
like-
at home or on the road.
I'm thinking, did they
Hyenas
actually
are-
spray a real hyena for this movie? I hope not. I hope that was just.
Well, it
computer
might give
generated.
people a wrong impression. I'd rather tangle with at least a black bear than with a hyena. Hyenas are rough, tough customers. They'll take on lions and scare them away, okay? They're a lot smaller, but they're really mean. The women hyenas, the female hyenas, are even rougher and tougher than the males, apparently. So
And
apparently
anyway.
they got a lot of testosterone.
So, and then this one. Now, Gerard Butler was supposed to be a real estate sort of person in this, and he doesn't look like.
I was just going to say, I don't know too many real estate agents who have facial hair on.
Exactly.
And that's not just the women.
And so I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, well, I don't really believe that part. And then, so anyway, it's an action thing. His wife gets kidnapped or wife-napped, whatever, and he's trying to find her and her parents, and the police don't really believe him that he's not responsible, but he's like going the extra mile to get her, and
He's not responsible for her.
not responsible for her disappearance.
Oh, there we go.
Because, I mean,
Because
she
when
has-
you said not responsible, that comes with being a real estate agent.
Yeah.
With
No.
you know one exception.
But she ends up being found, so don't bother watching it. There you go. I just spoiled it for you. Now you don't have to watch it.
Oh no, you might have spoiled the movie for them, but you
I
you actually
saved
made
you.
their day.
Yes, because you don't want to have to watch either of these. They're garbage. They really are. So go ahead and talk about Genius.
Talk
some
about
more.
Genius. Maybe in general. I start off with in general. They have a little added feature at the end. They have a few biographical touches for some of the major actors, maybe 4 of them. And a little feature on Ronnie Howard, or they call him Ron Howard now. I can remember when he was Opie. Nowadays, Opie for me's one of our dogs, one of our Chihuahuas, but Opie was a little kid on Andy Griffith's show way back when, and he grew up to be Ronnie Howard, then Ron Howard. So, features on him, but there was a little thing on what is genius. Wow, that's good. There are a fair number of feminists, maybe a lot of them, who are saying, don't use the word genius or brilliant, because that's just you. Maybe they don't say just use, but generally used to describe men. I'm going, just don't use the words, or use them ironically. You know what? Once I was described as being a genius, and the word was used several times, and it was used for deliberate effect and stuff like that, and I don't think the person was being ironic. And I just said, well, I'm not one. There's no such thing as genius. So let's just strike it from the vocabulary, okay? So nowadays you'll hear women writers being described as brilliant, and every so occasionally genius, maybe even describing Margaret Atwood cautionary tale about Handmaid's Tale or whatever. I'm going, it's a tale, but I don't know if it's cautionary. At any rate, genius. And one person was using an analogy. It was kind of like, scientists kind of live on the edge of the darkness. I think they were saying scientists. But a genius goes right into the middle of the darkness and creates the light inside. Real genius. Here's, if there is such a thing, and I don't think there's such a thing. What there is there are people that actually work hard. They work smart, and they have courage. So I shouldn't have to explain working hard, but I'm sure there's a few people out there, not a few who would hate my guts and stuff like that, even if they just heard about this and weren't watching. But the working smart's a little bit of a problem for people. And what that is basically finding out what people have done right in the past and applying it to the problem that you're dealing with, the problem. And finding out what people did wrong. And that one's, both of those are kind of tough. And courage, I shouldn't have to explain, but I can remember one physicist saying to me, and yes, I am interested in physics. And I asked him two different things. One, he had no idea what he was contributing to, but he actually found out what the medium, or rather media, for light is. But he doesn't know he's discovered it. He discovered it for me, because I asked him a question. Now they did say genius, and I'd come up with this on my own. It aren't so much coming up with fascinating answers for questions. They're coming up with fascinating questions. So I came up with a question. I don't know if he found it that fascinating. The question I'd found fascinating, and his answer was semi-expected, but it's amazing he came up with it so fast. And he narrowed it down for me. I knew it was one of two things, if not both. But then I started talking. I was asking him a few questions. I'm going to say that he did not come from the University of Lethbridge. I don't think he's ever taught at the University of Lethbridge. So get that straight. So he doesn't teach at the University of Lethbridge now, so far as I know, and never has, so far as I know. I don't think he's ever lived in Lethbridge. Okay? So I was asking him a few questions, to which he didn't know the answer. He's very honest about it, having to do with the atomic numbers of various elements. And I just kept on. He was a very patient guy. It was about 45 minutes. I was just doing the Socratic thing, asking questions. I wasn't looking to put him down. I was just trying to get to some place. I was asking questions. And he found them semi-fascinating, I guess. I don't know. And we came to some conclusions, or at least I did, for both of us. Tentative. But all science should be relatively tentative. We're absolutely tentative. And after all of that, he came up with a punchline. But he wasn't joking. I'm kind of joking on the square when I mention it. And understand, he had an academic position. I'm not in North America. I'm not going to specify what country. I don't want to get him in trouble. Why? Here's what he said. I could follow up on what you're doing, but I'd lose my job. And I'm kind of putting an exclamation mark after that, but there's no exclamation mark. And all I said, and there was no exclamation mark. There's going to be when I say it now, but there wasn't. Yeah. Well, I didn't put an exclamation mark. It's kind of like not even a capital letter on the Y. Yep. ... No exclamation mark. Yep. It's just, yeah. It's just like when Princess Leia says in the first Indiana Jones movie?
No.
No, it'd be the Star. Is it? Yeah, it's in the first Star Wars. She says to Harrison Ford, "I love you," and all Harrison Ford says is just deadpan. I know. Yeah, I know. So all I said was, "Yep." So what is genius really? What I was dealing with the questions I was asking that guy, it's just simple stuff. Simple stuff. Didn't involve complex analysis. It didn't involve even matrices. It didn't involve topology. It just involved squares and cube. Square numbers and cube numbers. That's all this involved. What valued thinking is really just opening your eyes and keeping them open. Keeping them open is the hard work. The opening your eyes is the working smart. And then reporting what you see is the courage. The courage to say something, to follow up on what you're doing, or on what I'm doing, and understanding that you could lose your job. Doesn't matter to me, because I'm retired right now. But it wouldn't have mattered to me anyway back in the past if I'd been a professional physicist, because I would have gone ahead and lost my job. Because the $100,000 a year or whatever wouldn't have interested me enough. I would have been more. I would have recanted like Galileo back in the day. I would have tried to publish, unlike Copernicus, before my deathbed. But deathbed moments. But there you go. So I'm not sure exactly when the camera cut out, when I was dealing with genius before, but we got down basically, I think, to Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, where he published 4 papers in 1905. Now, spoiler alert, I'm afraid it was a Annus Mirabilis. No, Annus Horribilis. Look that up in your equivalent of your funking Wagnos. You'll find it in the reference part of a university library. There'll probably be a pretty good Latin, English dictionary. Annus Horribilis. So what he's doing, starting with his paper, was published in, what is it? The Annales de Physique. Way back when, 1905, one of the papers was on relativities. A pretty short paper. Not a lot of mathematics in it, for my taste. Maybe too much philosophy. And maybe a whole lot too much philosophy. what was it Mick Jagger once said in an interview? Too much philosophy in the bath is not a good thing. And too much philosophy while you're dreaming about physics in the bath is not a good thing. So Einstein's going along saying there's nothing, no possible medium in a vacuum, outer space, a vacuum tube, etc., etc., and to carry light. So light has to be a particle, but also a wave. So this is old-fashioned thinking, goes back to Newton at the very least. Newton, as opposed to Christian Huygens, I believe it was, a Dutch physicist. How much time? 5?
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Well, not quite.
Thought light was a particle. Huygens, as I recall, thought light was a wave. It was right. Well, about 100 years later or so, maybe a little bit longer, Thomas Young came up with what everyone thought was most people thought was a definitive answer. He did an experiment, maybe a couple, that indicated light was a wave. And then along comes Einstein, and he's saying, it's both a wave and a particle. Hey, physicists, it's been over 100 years since Einstein won the Nobel Prize. As I recall, it was 1921. I was around. That's how old I was. No, my dad was almost around. He was born in 1923, and he lived until relatively late last year. But no, I was born in 1954, the year rock and roll was almost invented. And it was invented well before then. I think Rocket 88 was several years before then. Featuring Ike Turner, and I believe not on the guitar, but the piano. At any rate, that's how the story goes. So, it's kind of old-fashioned to say light is a particle. Dates back at least to Newton. How long ago was Isaac Newton? I'm not talking about Newt in the Herc stuff, because if there was such a thing as Newton, what was he, a centaur or something like that in the Hercules cartoons? Anyway, Hercules, if there ever was a figure, and I'd say there was an original figure perhaps that would be historical, something like historical, but it became legendary, very legendary. Eventually was made by the Greeks into something like a god. And you'll even find him up there in the sky. There's a constellation called Hercules. Yeah, I'm not making it up. And check it out. He's generally thought of as being upside down. And maybe doing a somersault out there in the skies. Just north of the ecliptic. Yeah, I kind of know. He's next to Ophiuchus, or however you pronounce the name. That's the serpent breast. Ophelia. You know the root of her name is serpent. Ophelia. See? At any rate, yeah. Trump, the way some people describe him, it's like a serpent. No, that's a little bit of a joke. Pretty feeble, but hey, give me credit for trying. Anyway, where was I about Einstein? Yeah, so he's saying that light is both a particle and a wave. I'm calling it a particle is old-fashioned. When did Newton die? 1727. I was around. No, I wasn't around then. That was a long time ago. Coming up 300 years ago. And, it was almost 200 years before Einstein was saying light was a particle. Old hat. Now, that's not a sufficient argument for against something. That's a logical fallacy to say something's old-fashioned or old. But it should make us a little bit suspicious. But it gets worse. Because you see, when you say light is a particle and a wave, that's paradoxical. That's paradoxical thinking. That's like saying, it's 2/3 as bad as saying God is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. 3 entities all in one. What you're dealing with is medieval thinking. Medieval thinking. You know, it's almost like calling evolution evolution. You getting that little pun there? I know it's feeble, but I'm joking on the square here. It's feeble. I don't care, because it's for a purpose. Medieval thinking. Middle ages thinking. We can't go around thinking like this. But of course, along comes Niels Bohr, and he's featured in this movie, or this series of almost like movie, TV series. And he just goes gaga over what Einstein's been able to accomplish. And so what he eventually looking for is complementarity. That's his fancy word for another fancy word, which is paradox. He loves paradox. As soon as we get down to the microscopic level for him, or the macroscopic level for Einstein, in other words, we're using telescopes or microscopes, things are different than they are in reality. Things are different. He loves that, because then you can start up making stuff up out of whole cloth. And you start saying, I made this up out of whole cloth, and let me tell you, this is the richest silk going. And you look at it, you say, it's moth-eaten, and it's canvas to start off with. Those moths must be in awful bad shape having to chew on that canvas. So we've got this medieval type of thinking, and you got old-fashioned kind of scientific thinking. That's not a definitive argument. It's not even an argument against this sort of stuff, because both of those arguments are logical fallacies. What they should do, however, is make us suspicious. Okay? So I mentioned a physicist I was talking to, and you know, with sound, the medium, what happens is, let's say in the air, I expel, molecules from my lungs. Boom, they run across the medium, and the medium slows them down. But you know, the molecules I'm expelling, and you really, like when you're singing, you're really not expelling much. It's amazing what you're doing. I guess you're setting up actually sound waves in your lungs and stuff like that. When you sing loudly, you're not supposed to be spitting stuff out or puffing or panting, like when you're doing opera singing. But at any rate, you get molecules moving, and they start punching the air. And the air punches back. It slows them down at least. But the molecules eventually kind of get their way. They get the message across because they set up a wave pattern. Boom, they start moving other molecules and others in a wave pattern, and it eventually gets to the receiver there on the camera, and there are other means by which we can put the stuff that's recorded on the camera on the internet, blah blah blah, on and on. So this there's a media there. There are media. There's a particular medium here. What would it be for light? Well, I was mentioning on another podcast, this guy called Alpha, 1937 apparently. He says, when we get stuff out in space, we'll find out, and it was 20 years later they started finding this stuff out. He was right. Einstein was wrong. So they were saying genius is getting out in the darkness and shining the light there, bringing your light along. Einstein gets out in